Okay, welcome everyone to this next interview of the She Shakes the World interview series. And I'm Rachel Waite, as you know, and today I am blessed to have with me Sarah Wilson. She's based over here in the UK. I'll let her share with you more about where she is. But she is, let me introduce her first. I think some of you are going to find this really fascinating. You're going to find this really helpful. She is a self-esteem and confidence and identity coach, which means that she supports women who have been through toxic relationships. She helps them move forwards from these relationships with a lot more confidence. And so I think this is a topic that's going to be relevant to quite a few of our listeners. So if you either feel like you're in a toxic relationship, or you've maybe been through a toxic relationship, or you're not sure, maybe Sarah today can help us identify what that is and how to navigate it as well. So I really hope you enjoy this interview, Sarah. Thank you for being here with us. Do introduce yourself, and we're going to hear more about your story as well, but just let us know more about who you are, where you're based, and your story as to how you ended up, coaching women in this particular area.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Wilson. I live near Brighton in the UK, over nearer to Brighton than some of you are. I've been coaching for about 6 years. I started coaching when I was in a corporate role, supporting the women in the team, including myself, who were doing a lot of work around domestic violence and child protection. And the company thought it would be a good idea to have some coaching involved so that we could help support each other.
Yes.
And then when I moved companies to a different company a few years later, which wasn't quite the same fit for me, so to say that relationship can also be in a workplace as well, I decided that I would start my coaching practice as a side hustle, and within 6 months had enough work and clients and what have you to be able to give up the toxic day job. But
Amazing.
Why do I do it in the first place? I do it in the first place because that's my story too, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, more in the today. But it's an area of real passion for me. I love talking about it, and I'm really excited for the opportunity to come and chat to you all today. So thank you, Rachel, for that.
You're so welcome. So let's go into your story then, Sarah. So because I know you're open to talking about it. What happened to you? How did you find yourself in a toxic relationship, and how did you personally navigate that?
So toxic relationships for me started when I was really quite young with my parents. So I'm an only child, had a lovely childhood up until around sort of 10, and then became aware that we were no longer this little team of 3, that something was going on, and I didn't necessarily know exactly what that was. My parents' relationship really broke down for a number of years, although they are actually still together now. It was a very toxic relationship experience. And there were lots of issues. My mum was diagnosed with having multiple sclerosis when I was about 10 or 11. It was kept as a secret from me for quite a long time, even though I knew something was going on. And if children think that there's something happening, they will make up their own stories. And so for me, that was a really challenging time. And then I had my own diagnosis of epilepsy, and my dad just couldn't deal with any of this at all. So my mum would come to me with her problems, and I was still so young to deal with that, and it caused real issues. And then we ended up having a very difficult relationship, both me and my mum and me and my dad, and obviously seeing this toxic relationship. By the time I got to adulthood, I just wasn't prepared for adult relationships or adult life. And so I ended up basically collecting a whole string of relationships with really, really toxic men. So men who would put me down, men who would not support me, men who would make me feel small, men who would hurt me. And that culminated in an abusive marriage. And basically what that did was from about 10, I was already feeling I wasn't good enough. And then I was going into adult relationships, realizing that these people were just, giving me more and more evidence that I still wasn't enough, and I still wasn't good enough, and I still wasn't worthy, and really squashed me. So outwardly, I had like this character, this mask of this amazing confidence and all this kind of thing. And that my life, I had my stuff together, but it wasn't true. I didn't really tell anybody about the difficulties I was experiencing. I felt a lot of shame around that.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to then make a decision to leave. And when I did, it was in quite a sort of drastic way. But it was a really, really hard time. And it wasn't until after that I started to realize that perhaps there was a different choice I could make.
And how did you navigate that? How did you know, okay, I need to leave this relationship now? What was the catalyst that made you go, I can do this, I'm going to leave this relationship?
So the relationship had been emotionally abusive for a long time, particularly around alcohol and my husband's drinking. And I would be horrible to him when he wasn't drunk in order to get through the fact that I was so angry at him. And I used to sit on the bathroom floor when he'd gone to sleep at night, sobbing into a big thick towel, just going, just somebody tell me what to do. I need to know what to do. I need to know what the best thing is. And that was a long time. And I honestly don't exactly know what the catalyst was. My mum kind of knew what was going on, and she was quite supportive. And she was saying to me, you don't need to make a decision today or tomorrow, but one day you will know the right decision to make. So on this particular day, I knew that I was going to end the relationship, come hell or high water. He was going out that night on a stag do. And my plan, very drastic plan, was I'm going to do anything I can tonight to get him to hit me, because if he hits me and I leave, people will understand that. They won't understand why I would leave an emotionally abusive relationship, but they will understand if I said, well, he hit me, he punched me, whatever it was. So I basically plucked up the courage to, I guess, goad him as much as possible into doing that, so that I could have a decent enough reason that people wouldn't judge me for leaving my relationship.
Wow. I'm just going to let that sink in a moment. I mean, that is how difficult for you to have to feel like there had to be signs of physical abuse for you to be able to relieve the relationship. You know, that because I imagine some listeners, you know, will have been through similar sort of emotional toxicity, but that you felt that wasn't worthy enough for you to leave the relationship. It had to be a physical sign for you to go, well, that's my reason for leaving. That's
it was really, really difficult. Just to be clear, actually, the hitting didn't happen. Right. He came home and he said, you're done, aren't you? You've had enough. And that night we agreed that we were going to split. It became quite nasty from him afterwards, and he was removed from the property by a friend who worked for the police a few times before kind of things moved on. But it was very strange. When I was working in domestic violence, for crying out loud, I knew what domestic violence looked like. I knew it wasn't just hitting, but for whatever reason, I couldn't categorize my own relationship as domestic violence. Like, that's what I did at work and at home. I was having a difficult relationship, but actually then as I spoke out more, and I went on this particular training course, and we were sitting in this room, and there was like a number of strangers in there, and it was about domestic violence. It was run by the police, and they were talking about the power of emotional abuse and why women stay for a lot longer, and how damaging it is, how long it goes on for, the elements that it kills within the individual person, you know, self-esteem, confidence, etc. And it just clicked at that particular point that this was domestic violence, and it is domestic violence. He might not have hit me, but he was very violent around me. He was very aggressive, in my face, shouting, screaming, punching stuff. You know, that's still abuse. That's, you know, being physical around you. You don't have to wait until somebody punches or hits you or hurts you for you to say this isn't okay. And I had this big thing around my wedding vows and for better, for worse, and all this kind of thing. But it was actually a vicar who said to me at one point, Sarah, if somebody breaks the contract that's been created between you by behaving in that way, then if you opt to leave, that's not you breaking that contract, that is their behaviours that have done that. And that gave me a lot of comfort. That gave me a lot of comfort to think, this isn't just me giving up really easily on a marriage. This is me saying this behavior is not acceptable and I don't feel safe anymore. And so I'm going to go. So anybody who is thinking whilst listening to this, it's just emotional abuse, he just shouts at me, whatever it is, it's still abuse. It's still something that's okay to leave and needs to be left, because there's such a bigger part of your story waiting for you once you feel like you can turn that page.
That's so powerful, isn't it? And what would you say to someone listening who is thinking, gosh, like bit like you were, you were pretending to the outside world that you were confident and that everything was okay, but then you were going home at night, like you said, and sort of crying in your bathroom. What would you say to someone who's sort of at that point right now? They're thinking, how do they move forward from it? They're looking for answers. They're looking for a way to maybe leave or make a change, but they're feeling guilty and they're feeling shame and they're feeling all these, they're sort of got this sort of inner dialogue going on. And what would be the next step for them, would you to say, to move forwards?
I think, I mean, at the time that I was leaving my husband, or in the process of kind of getting myself ready to do that, there wasn't as much stuff available to kind of use as resources. So I would say probably the first thing is to educate, self-educate, go to Facebook, come into groups about toxic relationship. I'm part of the group that deals with toxic relationships, in a group called Avoiding Toxic Relationships. About 40,000 people in that group. As it stands right now, and it's a great space to go. Yes, you're always going to get people in there who are just wanting to who are still very much in victim mentality about it rather than wanting to move forward, but it does give the option in a safe space to be able to talk about what you're experiencing and get people's feedback. And telling your friends is great, but the difficulty with friendships is they will have very set ideas with the best intentions of what you've got to do. And for me, I had to leave at the time that was right for me. And that meant not telling my friends, because I knew that they potentially wouldn't understand why I was still there, what I was doing, all these kinds of things. But I needed to wait until I was strong enough to leave that he couldn't tempt me back. So I know that if I'd left when I was like really tentative about it, potentially he could have said all the right things and got me to go back. And if you go back, I think it's probably harder to then leave again. And we'd have gone back and papered over the cracks and maybe had another baby, and and I would have felt then even more trapped with 2 children. So for me, the thing that was missing that I could have done with, that I would recommend now, is just educate yourself on what's actually happening. And that you definitely know inside you that whatever's happening is not quite okay, but there's a difference between not quite okay and right, it's now time to leave. So spend that time really learning about what's going on in your relationship and the longer term impacts of what's going to happen with that. And for me, I did things like I must have known I was going to leave, because I took on a second job that he didn't know about and utilised that money to pay off debt, so that I was in a better financial position when we split, to be able to afford monthly outgoings for a small flat for myself and my son. So I must have known that I was going to do it, but preparations being put in place and understanding what it is that you're experiencing are probably the 2 most important.
And how do you help women build their confidence back up then? So I imagine there's quite a lot of low self-esteem that comes from being in this type of relationship. What advice could you give someone to build their confidence back up and to start believing in themselves and believing in their worth? Because we often end up in this type of relationship because we don't believe in ourselves. We don't have a lot of self-worth and self-confidence. What advice could you give to someone sort of who's struggling with that?
So I think a lot of people think that they can't come and see me unless they've left the relationship. But actually, I coach women from the point that they realise that their relationship is toxic. And I don't tell them that they have to leave the relationship. We work on building up their self-esteem and their confidence and their right to a happy life of somewhere that they feel safe, and in a relationship with somebody that, you know, wakes up every morning and thinks, oh my God, I'm so lucky to be with them. I help a lot of women to deal with the mindset issues around that. Some of them choose to stay and work out a mindset around dealing with that, so that the words, you know, they just roll off you. Teflon coated, I call it. So they're like non-stick. And then some of those women over time do then decide to make the transition and leave. And I support them through that as well. And actually, I've helped one woman from, I'm in a toxic relationship and I hate it, and I think I need to leave, but I need the strength to do that. And she's now in another relationship, and I think this has been quite a long ongoing placement. And I think he might be about to propose, so there's a possibility I'm going to have my first wedding soon.
That is amazing. How lovely to be able to sort of experience that sort of spectrum of, you know, of your coaching relationship, to see all that develop as well. That is amazing.
It's awesome. And, you know, the most important thing when you leave the relationship is to take that time to heal and grow and become an individual person that you like so much that if you get into a relationship again, you're not sucked in. Like, often people who are in relationships that are quite toxic, they take on all that other person's likes, passions, and they forget that they're an individual. But actually the most successful partnerships where you've got two individual people who kind of come together and lean into each other to make this partnership element, but they've got their own individual personality still going on as well. And those are the most successful relationships. It's really important that they spend that time creating that individuality that then they just want to fiercely protect if they're going into a relationship, instead of just morphing into the partner that they choose.
Yes. And that's why, like you said, it's so important to take, which can be scary. It can be really difficult to be on your own, you know, in inverted commas, but actually giving yourself that time to discover actually who am I? What do I like? What is, you know, and I imagine what might birth out of that is sort of career changes, all kinds of things probably come from that time of discovering who I am, how important they are, the self-belief, so that when they do enter into a new, if they do enter, you know, if they choose to enter a new relationship, they're entering a relationship as a sort of whole person,
100%,
and knowing that, believing in themselves, and knowing what they're willing to sort of, and accept is the right word, but, you know, would that be right, you know, in a relationship, what they're willing to.
Setting the expectations is really important. When you've had a history of toxic relationships, it's very easy to fall into another relationship, people please within that relationship, and actually never give that person the either opportunity to care as well, or, you know, what you're showing yourself, what you're putting out there is, in a relationship, you come first and I come second. And from the get-go, it should always be this partnership. And although often in a relationship, long-term relationship, it's not really ever 50-50, but it should balance itself out. So sometimes, like my husband at the moment is going through a really rough time at work, so I'm probably giving that bit more to support him. But then when I've had difficulties, like when I was really unwell, when I had a bit of a breakdown, you know, he was the one who took the lead, and we sort of bounce and balance each other out now. But the scariest part for me after splitting up, because splitting up, you think, oh, I've done it. But actually, that is the start of the journey part then to move on. And the thing that kind of hit me, the light bulb moment, if you like, for me, was sitting on the sofa. I'd moved into my new flat, obviously was single, had my son. My son had gone to his dad's for the weekend, and it was about 36 hours before he was due home. And I just sat very still on the sofa. I wasn't watching anything, wasn't doing anything, basically just sitting there waiting to be a mum again. And I was like, this is ridiculous. If I don't make a change, I'm going to just be his mum, and I'm going to fall into another relationship again that has the same outcomes. So I decided I would start a list of the things that I love to try and establish what I could bring more of into my life. I'd lost a number of friends through the split and the breakdown. So I started this list. I literally described this notebook to you exactly. And it sat on my table for about 3 weeks. It took me 3 weeks to fill one side of A4 with the things that made me happy. And that was a real moment of, oh my God. So if anybody is looking for self-diagnosis about having low self-esteem and low confidence, try and make a list of all the things you love and see how long it takes you.
I was going to ask, actually, you know, when someone has made that decision, like you said, and they've left and they suddenly find themselves on their own, and like they get to that point where they're on the sofa, or, you know, they're feeling a bit lost or a bit stuck. Like you said, you recommend that they write a list of the things that they like doing. Is there anything else that they can do to really, because sometimes I think at that moment it would be very easy to perhaps give in and go, oh, do you know what, I might go back, because I know that it's kind of, it might not be safe, but I know it, this I don't know, and this is confusing and this is new to me. How can they sort of navigate that time so that they can move forwards and not go back?
So it's really all about, first of all, being very self-compassionate. So change is hard. We are programmed as human beings to dislike change, even if our normality is uncomfortable for us, even if it's painful for us, in fact. We don't like that. And to kind of have an understanding of that's how our brain is going to work can really, really help to just keep going one foot in front of the other. Don't get frustrated with yourself when you're sad. Go through, I mean, you go into the grief curve. So what happens is you leave the relationship, you fall into like this hole, I suppose, really, and you ricochet around things like only remembering the good parts and belittling the difficulties and the bad parts, anger, disbelief, frustration, confusion, fear. There's a whole load of stuff, and it's important that people know that this isn't going to be an easy journey. But as you build up the momentum kind of going through this curve, eventually you get over the other side where you've accepted that relationship has died and that there's a new you being birthed now. But is it a nice experience? Not necessarily. And I think it's important to be open about that. When I'm coaching women who are going through that, I have a VIP option. So I'm literally within sort of reasonable hours, I'm on the other end of the phone. So if they're struggling, they can pick up the phone and go, oh, I don't think I could do this. Because it is, you know, particularly when you've been in a toxic relationship with somebody where you've got like a trauma bond, for example, where very similar to if somebody is kidnapped, for example, and they build a relationship with their kidnapper. That can happen in normal relationships as well, where there's an element of toxicity. And so you're automatically kind of drawn back into that. So it can be quite hard, but I promise you it's worth it. The other things that you can do that are sort of tangible is to, once you've made your list of the things that you like, start to try and insert them into your life. So for example, what can I think of that's on mine now? So I've got things like getting my magazine delivered each month. I love it when my magazine arrives. I love that. Opening Prosecco on a Friday night, that's always quite popular. Lighting my candles, all of those sorts of things, so that you're looking at things from the big stuff all the way through to the little stuff, and then you start to inject that into your life. You do probably need to keep distracted and busy for a bit. So seeing friends, setting up new hobbies for yourself. You know, you've got this time now. You've got time that you can do other things that you enjoy, that is going to start to help to create you as an individual person. So if there were things that you loved that the ex-partner hated, start to do them again. My little bit of rebellion still even now is I will put way too much tomato ketchup on my plate. So he used to moan at me for using too much tomato sauce. So even 13 years on, that's my, I'm still doing it.
I love that. That's made me giggle, but yes, I can see why you would do that. Yes, that's amazing. And I think that's all really helpful. I hope everyone is listening has found that all really helpful. I mean, it's going to give them the courage to keep moving. Like you said, that sort of that dip and to come out the other side.
Yeah.
I know you also wanted to mention, Shara, because it's obviously very important that you're also, this interview is about, the interview series about women who are shaking the world, and that I think it's important that we raise the vibrations. And I think part of that is to help educate from a young age.
Definitely.
And it's you and I both work with women generally who are sort of late 30s, 40s onwards, and they're coming through their traumas, and we're helping them through that. But it's actually really important that we catch children at a young age, so that perhaps they're not having to go through these traumas. Would you like to just share about your desire to help change the curriculum in schools and help children with self-esteem and that side of things?
Yeah, so in the last few months since all the pandemic and what have you, I've supported a number of teachers. And it's noticeable that within primary schools, there's been a lot more support around mental well-being for children. But when it comes to secondary school, there really isn't anything. Like when I was young and going through my own difficulties, we didn't even really have pastoral care like they do now. But I really want the government to take it a step further forward and actually put mental well-being and self-esteem into the curriculum, where the children actually have a class that focuses on these sorts of life skills. So let's say, for example, you enter adult life with low confidence, low self-esteem. The problem is that what that creates is quite significant. So you'll have children who are then growing up into adult life. They're not fulfilling their potential. So they're not necessarily able to give what they can offer back to the world, because they're so, like, they don't know what that is. They don't know what it looks like. They don't know who they are as a person. And also, I'm watching my two teenagers navigate relationships now. And, fortunately, they're both in healthy relationships at the moment. But we have had to kind of gently talk about some of the things that haven't been so helpful, particularly in my daughter's relationships, which have been along things like, oh, he wants to see me, doesn't want me to see my friends. And so, although that might be done with the best intentions, and that's very sweet, and she thinks that's amazing, the reality is that actually it's important to maintain friendships with your girlfriends as much as it is to have time with a partner. So I don't want her growing up thinking that when a guy says that's really, really sweet. I want her to be aware that actually having that, keeping that element of your identity is really incredibly important. So for me, if you think about sort of self-esteem leading to bad relationships and what that involves, even if you just take domestic violence as like an umbrella thing, and then you're looking at the cost to mental health services, emergency services, policing, the NHS, if you just put just that, that's going to have a massive, massive impact on how much spending is required. So I would really love the opportunity for children to have well-being, even things like identifying, like a lot of the people that I work with, when we first start to talk about childhood or teenhood, and they're talking about, and they say, oh yeah, it was quite normal. Yeah, my dad used to hit me, or but didn't everybody's? And you think, actually, you haven't necessarily realized that you've grown up in a toxic environment when you've been younger. So if we had some sort, it would even come down to sort of safeguarding, because there's teens out there who have no idea that what's going on for them at home is abnormal, not okay, and what have you. And they're just going through things, feeling very low, feeling very lacking in self-esteem, but thinking this is what everybody's experiencing and not talking about it. So I see so many opportunities, if that's added to the curriculum, where actually we could get children who are better prepared to deal with challenges of adult life by, doing things as simple as setting boundaries and expectations around work life, around their relationships that they have, and what that would mean for not just the government and the country and the spending, but also for them individually to get as much fulfillment and satisfaction out of life as they possibly can whilst they're here.
Yeah. Wow. I really feel your passion for that, and I feel it because I'm very passionate about it as well, because I think bringing through this generation of younger children, or teenagers, young adults, to to be a lot freer than perhaps we were as we were growing up, and be more aware and be more open would just be, well, I just think it would mean so much for them, but for the world as a whole, if we look at it
Absolutely.
on a bigger scale. Sarah, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I know we could talk a lot longer.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
probably could, but I realize, this is an interview and it has to draw to a close. Is there a, I'm sure there were people who are listening who are absolutely fascinated by what you said, either about getting help for themselves, perhaps they're in a toxic relationship, or actually they've got teenagers and they're interested to help support them, through that time. What's the best way of them to get of connecting with you?
So I'm pretty much everywhere. So
Okay.
you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Sarah Wilson Coach on LinkedIn. You can connect with me through my website, which I know Rachel is going to share the
I will
details
share.
of various parts of these, which is great.
Yes.
You can follow me on Facebook and connect with me on Facebook. My page on Facebook is Coastal Coaching Sussex from striving to thriving. So that's on there as well, and I know that you're going to share the details
Yes,
of that.
I will.
I love it when people reach out to me in response to something that they've heard and what have you. So
Yes.
it would be lovely to hear from anybody. I do like making meaningful connections with people. So if we have the opportunity to chat as well, that would be amazing. But yeah, come into my world. I would love to have you and help sort of raise this change for women that is absolutely achievable, because if I can do it, anybody can.
Sarah, I feel so empowered. Thank you so much. It's been great. And I know I can always feel, even though this recording has not gone out yet, I can always feel that there's somebody listening. If it's just one person, there's a few people
Absolutely.
or hundreds of people listening who've needed to hear this. And if we're just doing our part to help bring awareness, raise the vibration, then we're doing what we meant to do. So thank you for sharing your time with us today. And I can't wait for this to get out and for people to hear it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the She Shakes the World podcast series. I really hope you have been inspired by the guests that I have brought to you. And if you are motivated in any way to do some deeper work on yourself, and you are curious to know how I could potentially support you overcome all the things that are holding you back so that you can fully step into your power, your gifts, and shake the world in the way that you are meant to, please head over to my website, rachelwaite.com. You will find the link also in the episode notes. And if you head over there, you will find some free meditations. You will find out information about my group program. You will find out how I could potentially work privately with you to really do some deep work for you. Like I said, head over to rachelwaite.com. The link is also in the episode notes, and I truly hope that I see you hopping on a call with me, or that you are able to download one of those meditations, or that you simply come back and listen to another episode of the She Shakes the World series. So many opportunities are open to you. Thank you once again, and you take care.